Have you ever wondered what secrets lie within abandoned places? Let me tell you a story about a mannequin factory that hid something much darker than forgotten dust and cobwebs. In a small, foggy town in the 1960s, there was a booming mannequin factory run by a man named Victor Grayson. Victor was known for creating lifelike mannequins, so realistic that they seemed to breathe. But Victor had a secret. His mannequins weren't just lifelike, they were alive, or at least they had been. Local legends spoke of townsfolk mysteriously disappearing, leaving behind no trace except for eerie, waxy footprints near the factory. One day, a young journalist named Clara decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and recorder, she snuck into the factory late at night. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the mannequins stood in perfect rows, their lifeless eyes watching her every move. Suddenly, Clara tripped over a loose floorboard. Beneath it, she found a hidden trapdoor leading to a dark basement. She descended, only to discover a horrific scene, rows of mannequins with human faces frozen in silent screams. Victor had been encasing people in wax, preserving their terror for eternity. Clara's recorder captured faint cries for help, but before she could escape, the door slammed shut. Victor emerged from the shadows holding a scalpel. He explained his twisted belief that true art required the essence of life itself. Clara fought back, managing to knock Victor unconscious. She fled the factory and alerted the authorities, but when they returned, the basement was empty. Victor and his mannequins had vanished without a trace. Years later, Clara shared her story, but few believed her. The factory was eventually demolished, but strange occurrences plagued the town. People still went missing, and lifelike mannequins continued to appear in store windows, their faces eerily familiar. They say books hold stories, but what if the stories could hold you? This is the haunting tale of a library where the pages don't just tell tales, they steal souls. In the heart of an old forgotten town stood a library unlike any other, known as the Whitmore Archives. It was rumoured to house every book ever written, including some that were never meant to be read. The head librarian, Eleanor Whitmore, was an eccentric recluse who spoke to the books as though they were alive. "They whisper secrets," she'd say to those who dared question her sanity. The library was abandoned after Eleanor vanished one stormy night, but visitors to the archives reported strange happenings, books falling off shelves, whispers in the dark, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. Years later, a group of college friends decided to explore the library for a school project. Among them was Sarah, a literature major obsessed with rare books. They broke in at midnight, armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure. As they wandered the dark halls, Sarah found a peculiar book, bound in black leather, titled The Infinite Collection. Its pages were blank until she opened it. The book began to write itself in real time, recounting their every move. Sarah opens the book, unaware of the doom awaiting her. Startled, she dropped it, but the words didn't stop. The book revealed secrets about each of them, secrets they'd never shared with anyone. The friends tried to leave, but the library had locked them in. Shelves shifted, blocking exits. Books began to fall, their pages fluttering like angry wings. Whispers filled the air, growing louder and more aggressive. One by one, the group was drawn to different books that called their names. Each time someone opened a book, they vanished, leaving only a blank page behind. Desperate to escape, Sarah realized the books weren't ordinary. They were traps, imprisoning the souls of readers who dared to open them. The only way out was to close the Infinite Collection. As the whispers turned into screams, Sarah fought the pull of the book. With trembling hands, she slammed it shut. The library fell silent, the air heavy with an eerie calm. Sarah was the only one who made it out. She returned the next day with authorities, but the library was gone. No building, no books, just an empty lot. Yet on her desk at home she found The Infinite Collection, now bound with her friends' names etched on the cover. The library is gone, but the curse lingers. Would you dare open a book that could seal your fate? There's a room in every town that nobody dares to enter. This is the story of room 616, where dreams go to die and nightmares take their place. The Mayflower Hotel was once a symbol of elegance in the 1920s, but as the decades passed, it fell into disrepair. Despite its dilapidation, one room was always locked and never rented out, room 616. Locals whispered about the room's dark past. Guests who stayed there reportedly suffered vivid, horrifying nightmares, dreams so real they would wake up with scratches and bruises. Some didn't wake up at all. Hotel staff claimed they could hear faint crying and muffled screams coming from the room, even when it was empty. A paranormal investigator named James, intrigued by the stories, decided to spend the night in room 616 to uncover the truth. Armed with cameras, a journal and a dream recorder, he checked in on a stormy night. At first, nothing happened. The room was cold and the air felt heavy, but it was quiet. James set up his equipment and fell asleep. That's when the nightmare began. He found himself trapped in a never-ending corridor lined with doors, each labelled with the names of people who had stayed in the room. As he opened each door, he was confronted by their most terrifying moments. An abusive past, a drowning accident, a murder. The last door bore his name. Inside he saw his greatest fear, his childhood self abandoned and crying, with shadowy hands dragging him into the dark. James woke up screaming, only to find himself still in the nightmare. His cameras showed him thrashing in bed, but no matter how much he yelled or moved, his body wouldn't wake up. The dream recorder played back garbled whispers, "Stay with us." Desperate, James grabbed his journal and wrote one sentence before everything went black. "The room doesn't dream, it remembers." The next morning, hotel staff found his body, lifeless and cold. But in the journal, under his final note, were dozens of new names that hadn't been there before. Room 616 remains locked to this day, but travelers claim they can hear scratching from the other side of the door. And sometimes at night, new names appear on the guest ledger, people who never checked in. Have you ever looked at a painting and felt like it was watching you? This is the story of a portrait that didn't just stare, it followed. In a quiet countryside manor, an art collector named Henry stumbled upon an estate sale. Among the treasures, he found a peculiar painting, a portrait of a woman dressed in black, her pale face framed by hauntingly deep eyes. Despite the eerie vibe, Henry couldn't resist buying it. He hung it in his study where he spent most of his time. But almost immediately, strange things began to happen. The room felt colder, and Henry started to notice subtle changes in the painting. The woman's eyes seemed to shift, following him no matter where he stood. One evening, Henry noticed something he hadn't before. A shadowy figure standing behind the woman in the portrait. He chalked it up to his imagination, but the figure grew clearer each day. Determined to uncover the truth, Henry researched the painting. He discovered it once belonged to a reclusive artist named Eleanor Graves, who vanished under mysterious circumstances. Legends claimed Eleanor's soul was trapped in her final piece, seeking vengeance on anyone who disturbed her work. That night, Henry heard whispers in his study. The painting's figure had moved again. This time, the shadow wasn't in the background, it was reaching out of the frame. Terrified, Henry tried to destroy the painting. He threw it into the fireplace, but the flames refused to touch it. Instead, the shadows in the room grew larger, consuming the walls and furniture. Suddenly, the woman in the portrait stepped out, her shadowy figure towering over Henry. She whispered, "You've invited me in," before vanishing into the darkness. When Henry's friends visited the next day, they found his study empty, except for the painting, now featuring two figures. The second figure was unmistakably Henry, trapped within the canvas. The painting now hangs in a local gallery, where visitors claim to hear faint whispers and feel cold hands brushing their shoulders. Some say the figures in the portrait change positions, their gazes filled with unspoken warnings.